The day my brother called a family meeting to remove me from our mother's estate, he was sitting at the head of his conference table in a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. He had his lawyer beside him, his wife across from him, and his son at the far end with his arms folded like a man who had already practiced this moment in a mirror. Richard spoke for 12 minutes. He used the words efficiency and consolidation and the family's future. I sat very still and listened to every single word. Then I drove back to my office, poured a cup of coffee, and called my supervisor at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division to let him know that the man I had been building a case against for 19 months had just handed me the last piece I needed. My name is Daniel Marsh. I am 54 years old. I work out of a mid-sized federal field office in Columbus, Ohio, and I have spent the better part of 2 decades doing one thing: following money through the places it goes when it does not want to be found. I am not a man who takes up much space. I drive a 2014 Subaru Outback with a dent in the rear quarter panel that I keep meaning to fix. I wear the same rotation of navy and gray blazers. I coach youth baseball on Saturday mornings when my caseload allows. And I have been coaching the same age group, 12-year-olds, for 11 years because that is the age at which kids are good enough to be taught something real, but not yet old enough to have stopped listening. I am quiet. I am patient. I am, by every external measure, exactly what my brother Richard has always told people I am. A mid-level government accountant who chose safety over ambition and spent his career coloring carefully inside lines that were too small to matter. Richard Marsh was the other kind of man. He had built Lakeshore Development Partners from a residential construction company our father started in the 80s into one of the largest commercial real estate developers in central Ohio. He had offices on 2 floors of a glass tower downtown. He had a home in Dublin with 12 rooms, a wine cellar, and a dock on a private pond, and he had filled every room of it with the kind of objects that announce to any visitor, before a single word is spoken, that their host has won. His wife, Glennis, had long ago decided that I was an inconvenience. She was not unkind, exactly. She was the kind of person who is polite in the same way a very clean surface is smooth. You can see your reflection in it, but you cannot find any purchase. For 15 years, she had managed my appearances at family events with the precision of someone who had mapped exactly how much of me was necessary and exactly how much was too much. Their son Parker, 29 years old, had joined the firm straight out of Ohio State and had inherited his father's instinct for a room and his mother's eye for useful people. He had once, at Thanksgiving dinner 5 years ago, described my work to a table of 12 as shuffling papers for the government. He had said it to get a laugh. He had gotten one. Our mother, Margaret, was 78 years old and lived in the house she and my father had bought in 1971. She had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia the previous winter. She was still sharp on good days. She still made coffee in the same percolator she had owned since before I was born. She had always stood, in the years since my father passed, slightly behind Richard. Not because she was afraid of him exactly, more because she had decided somewhere along the way that he knew which direction to face. She had never once told me she was proud of me. Not in words. It started, as these things tend to, with a number that would not behave. Specifically, a cluster of municipal infrastructure grants dispersed over 6 years to a consortium of private contractors working on municipal drainage and road repair projects across Franklin and Delaware counties. The amounts were large but not extraordinary. Individually, each one fell just beneath the threshold that triggers mandatory independent audit review. That was the first thing. The second thing was that they fell beneath that threshold with a consistency that was, statistically, almost impossible by accident. Not one of 18 separate disbursements in 6 years had crossed the line. Every single one was clustered in the narrow band between 80 and 94% of the trigger amount. Keisha Wu had brought the file to my desk on a Tuesday morning in March. She was 8 months into her first field assignment and had the particular gift that the best forensic analysts share: an instinct for when numbers are trying to avoid being seen. She had set the printout in front of me without saying anything and then said, "Does that look like what I think it looks like?" I looked at it for a long time. "Yes," I said. "Where does the contractor registration trace?" "Shell in Delaware, which points to another in Nevada. Which points to..." She paused. "I lost it at the 3rd layer. I need another day." "Take the day," I said. "Don't tell anyone what you're looking at." She had not asked why. That was the second reason I knew she was going to be excellent at this job. I spent the following week tracing the corporate structure myself. in the evenings, after the office emptied. The trail moved through 4 limited liability companies, each registered in a different state, each with a different registered agent, the whole architecture built with genuine professional skill. Whoever had designed it understood precisely how far you could push a paper structure before it needed reinforcement, and had reinforced it at exactly the right moments. The 4th entity pointed to a private equity holding company. The holding company's majority stakeholder was Lakeshore Development Partners. I sat at my desk at 20 minutes past 9 on a Thursday evening in early April. The office was empty. I could hear the building's ventilation system and the distant percussion of an elevator. I could feel, somewhere in the center of my chest, the very specific silence that happens when you find something you were not entirely prepared to find, even though you know, professionally, that this is exactly the kind of thing you're going to find eventually if you follow the money far enough. I did not call anyone that night. I went home, made a sandwich I did not taste, and sat at my kitchen table looking at nothing for a long time. The next morning I walked into Tom Eckhart's office and told him what I had found. I told him who my brother was. I gave him every reason to pull me off the case. Tom looked at me across his desk. Outside his window, Columbus was going about its morning. Do you want to be reassigned? I thought about the consistency of those numbers, the careful, practiced gap just below the audit threshold. I thought about how long it takes to build something like that. How many decisions go into keeping a structure running for 6 years without a single slip? No, I said. Then document everything twice, Tom said, and tell no one outside this room. But what I uncovered over the next 4 months made the grant fraud look like a footnote. The contractor payments were real work. The drainage repairs had happened. The road resurfacing was genuine. What Richard's network had done was inflate the material costs by between 40 and 60%, using falsified supplier invoices, then route the difference back through the shell structure to a set of people who had ensured the grants kept being approved. Those people included a city procurement officer named Darren Soule, whose approvals had been suspiciously consistent with the contract renewals, and whose personal finances, once I had a warrant for his bank records, told a story his salary alone could not explain. They included 2 county officials whose campaign donation histories, traced back carefully enough, connected to entities that were, at their root, not separate entities at all. And then there was the 3rd layer, the one I found in late July, while I was cross-referencing the shell company's filing history against a database of arbitration records. Lakeshore Development Partners had been involved in 9 contract disputes over the past decade. In 7 of them, the arbitration had been handled by a firm whose lead partner had a relationship, not documented, not visible without looking for it, but present, with a sitting county judge named Warren Aldis. Judge Aldis had, in his public career, overseen 3 separate rulings that had materially benefited Lakeshore Development in ways that were individually explainable and collectively something else. I stared at Aldis's name on my screen for a long time. I called Tom. There's a judge. Silence on the line. Then, show me. I showed him. It took 2 hours. At the end of it, Tom sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. Daniel, he said carefully, this is not just your brother's construction fraud anymore? No, I said. It's not. The moment we move on Aldis, this becomes a DOJ coordination matter. It becomes something we do once, completely, with no margin for error. Because a man like Aldis has access to information about ongoing investigations and people who owe him. I understood what he was saying. We had to build it all the way before we moved on any of it. The whole structure, every node, every connection, documented twice, and then documented again, before we touched a single piece of it. How long? I asked. However long it takes to do it right, Tom said. Months. If I had moved then on what I already had, I never would have found out how deep it actually went. I led 2 lives for the following 5 months. During the day, I worked my other cases, attended interagency briefings, drove the Subaru, coached baseball on Saturdays. I attended a family dinner at Richard's house in September. I ate the food Glennis had catered, listened to Parker talk about an upcoming development deal he was obviously proud of, watched my mother sit at the far end of the table being gently tended to by a woman Richard had hired to help with her care. I passed the breadbasket. I answered questions about work with the vague, uninteresting answers I had been giving that table for 20 years. At one point, Richard asked me, with the careful ease of a man who wants something to appear casual, whether I had any sense of what the IRS's current audit priorities were in commercial real estate. I said I was mostly working municipal finance. Not really my area. He nodded, said that was what he thought. That was a close call. I noted it. I kept my face exactly where it needed to be. In the evenings, I was building the case. I had, by October, traced every transaction in the shell structure back to its origin point. I had documented the full routing of $11 million over 6 years. I had reconstructed the relationship between Seoul and Lakeshore through 3 separate lines of evidence. I had built the Aldous connection carefully, brick by brick, until it was something that would hold up under the most aggressive defense attorney a federal judge had ever faced. And then, in late October, I found the piece I had not been looking for. One of the contractor firms in the network, not Lakeshore, a subsidiary 2 layers removed, had been awarded a county contract in 2019 to build a veterans transitional housing complex on the east side of Columbus. The project had been partially funded through a federal grant. The contractor had submitted completion certifications. The grant had been disbursed in full. The housing complex had never been completed. It existed on paper. On the ground, it was a partially graded lot with a chain-link fence around it and a sign that had been weathered to illegibility. 43 veterans had been on the wait list for that housing. 43 people who had been told they had a place coming, who had structured decisions around that expectation. I sat at my kitchen table that night and looked at the list of names for a long time. I memorized 12 of them. I do not know exactly why 12. It was what happened. I transmitted the completed case file to the Department of Justice on a Thursday in November. The response from the DOJ contact came back in writing. I have kept that email. I will not quote it here because I'm not that kind of person. But I have kept it. The following Friday, Richard called and asked me to come to a family meeting. Little did he know I'd been waiting for exactly this call. There were 5 of us in the conference room on the 14th floor of Richard's building. Richard, Glennis, Parker, their estate attorney, a man named Horton who had the careful blankness of someone paid to witness rather than to understand, and me. The view from that room was the Columbus skyline. It was a gray November day. I remember thinking that the city looked exactly like itself, indifferent, going about its business, entirely unaware of what was happening on the 14th floor. Richard spoke for about 12 minutes. He talked about administrative burden. He talked about asset consolidation. He talked about aligning the estate's management with the people who had invested in the family's future, a phrase he used twice. He talked about my different choices and my modest circumstances with a gentleness that was precisely calibrated to wound without leaving a mark. "You made your life the way you wanted it," he said finally. He had that look on his face, my brother. The look of a man who had never, in 57 years, been seriously wrong about anything. We respect that. But what we've built here isn't something that can be shared with people who aren't part of it. You understand? Glennis had her hands folded in her lap, and her chin at that angle she used to convey that she was above whatever was currently happening. Parker was looking at his phone under the edge of the table. I looked at my brother for a moment. I thought about a partially graded lot on the east side of the city with a weathered sign. I thought about 43 names on a wait list. "All right," I said. I shook Richard's hand. I told Horton it was nice to meet him. I took the elevator down 14 floors and walked to my car. I drove to a diner on Broad Street where I had a cup of coffee and a piece of apple pie. Then I called Tom Eckhart. "We're ready," I said. "Monday morning," Tom said. "Early." "Early's good," I said. The following Monday, at 6:52 in the morning, 4 unmarked vehicles pulled into the parking structure of Lakeshore Development Partners. 2 more went to an address in Upper Arlington. 1 went to a residence in New Albany. Richard was in his office when they came through the door. He was in his suit already, coffee in hand, the way he had arrived at that office every morning for 20 years. According to the agent's notes, he said, "I think there may be some kind of mistake here." There was no mistake. Parker was arrested in the lobby of the building, arriving for work, still wearing his coat. He had his phone in his hand. He did not resist. He simply stood very still with his hands at his sides, and the expression on his face was one I had never seen from him before. It was not arrogance. It was not charm. It was the expression of a 29-year-old who has just understood for the first time in his life that the floor he has been standing on was not as solid as he was told. Darren Soule was arrested at Columbus City Hall at 8:15. The 2 county officials were picked up before noon. Judge Oldis was the last. He was at the courthouse. He was taken through a side entrance. His attorney was contacted before he reached the building's exit. I was not present for any of it. I was at my desk. That evening I drove home, changed out of my work clothes, and went to baseball practice. I hit fly balls until my arm ached. I drove home and made dinner. I sat on my back porch in the dark and listened to the neighborhood quiet down around me. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt something more specific and harder to name. The feeling of a long calculation that is finally resolved into a correct answer. Satisfaction without celebration. The numbers had told the truth. That was all I had ever asked them to do. Richard's trial date is set for next spring. His attorneys are experienced and expensive, and he has, for the moment, enough in unfrozen assets to sustain a prolonged legal fight. It will not be enough. The documentation is what it is. Parker cooperated in exchange for a reduced charge. His sentencing is pending. I am told he is no longer working in real estate. Darren Soule lost his city position and is subject to a consent agreement that prohibits him from holding any public office or government contract role for 15 years. The county officials are negotiating separately. Warren Aldis surrendered his judicial appointment. His bar license is under review. The veterans' housing case was referred to a separate federal unit. I do not know the full outcome. I know that the lot is no longer controlled by a Lakeshore subsidiary. I know that 12 of the 43 names I memorized have been connected to alternative housing assistance through a county program that was activated after the fraud came to light. I do not know all 12 outcomes. I know some of them. Glennis was not charged. There was no evidence of direct involvement. She is, by all accounts, navigating the social consequences of what her husband built and discovering the precise limits of a world constructed entirely on someone else's standing. My mother, Margaret, was home when a federal agent visited to conduct a voluntary interview. She answered every question clearly and completely. Her attorney, one she chose herself, said she had been cooperative and forthcoming. She had been sitting at the kitchen table when the agent arrived. She had offered him coffee. He had declined. She had made some for herself anyway. She was wearing her coat. And then, 6 weeks after the arrests, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was careful and slightly unsteady. The script of a woman whose hands were not quite as steady as they used to be, but who had taken care with every letter anyway, the way she had always taken care with everything that mattered to her privately. I almost did not open it. I opened it. Daniel, she had written, I have started this letter 4 times. I am not good at starting things. I'm going to try to say what I mean and stop when I have said it. I knew your brother was not a good man. Not for a long time. I knew it the way you know a thing you have decided not to look at directly. I am not asking you to understand that or excuse it. I am telling you because you deserve to know that I knew. And I stayed quiet. And that is mine to carry. What I want you to know is this. I always knew what you were. I knew it when you were 11 years old and you organized the entire contents of your father's tool shed because you said the system he had didn't make logical sense. I knew it every time you were passed over for something at the family table, and you said nothing and kept your face exactly where it belonged. I knew it, and I never once told you, and I am sorry. I'm not asking for anything. I know I have not earned the right to ask, but if you were ever willing to come by on a Saturday and have a cup of coffee, I would like that. Just coffee. Not to fix anything. Your mother. I read the letter twice. I folded it and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, near the place where I keep things I'm not finished thinking about yet. Then I picked up my phone. It rang 3 times. She picked up on the 3rd, which told me she had been sitting near it. Daniel. Her voice was careful, like a woman who had rehearsed the word and was not sure whether saying it would help or not. I know a place on 5th, I said. Good coffee. Quiet. Nothing fancy. A pause. The kind of pause that has a lot of things moving through it. Tell me when, she said. Saturday, I said. 10 o'clock? There's no lesson I want to draw from this. I'm not a man who tends to find his own life instructive to other people. But here is what I know. For 30 years, my family decided who I was based on what they could see. The Subaru, the Blazers, the quiet office, the lack of ambition as they understood the word. They never asked what I did inside that office because knowing things about me had never been a priority, and it had never been a priority because they were certain. And certainty is expensive. It costs you everything you could have learned if you had stayed curious. I am still at my desk. I am still following the numbers, and the numbers in the end told the truth. What would you have done in my position? Let me know in the comments.